evening and a warm welcome to another episode of our series, Effective Teaching and Learning Institute. My name is Kwadwo and I have Kwesi on the other side. We'll be continuing with our discussion on direct instruction. In the last week, we looked at the concept of direct instruction. We identified that direct instruction has 7 key elements. And first on that is learning intentions. We defined what learning intentions are, and we talked about the fact that learning intentions are the core aims and targets that we seek to develop as we go through the teaching process. We also then mentioned what we call success criteria, something that we are going to even delve deeper into today. And then also we looked at status. I remember we realized that status is one side thing that we all need to be so passionate about and make sure that they are well done, because they mark the entry to a very good lesson. And if they are well done, it gets our learners well interested in whatever we intend to do. Then we also looked at the next element, which we call the presentation, or the main teaching ideas, what the teachers plans to do, the moment where the teacher then comes in to give a general sort of information that the learners are required to get. Then when that clearly shows that the first 3 is definitely preparing the students to be the ones, and they are to take the center stage of the direct instructional process. Then we mentioned that the 5th item is where you give the students the opportunity to have a guided practice. Whatever you present to the students, they need the opportunity to have the chance to practice it right there with you, so that you can ascertain for yourself that whatever has been presented, the students have grasped it. Then we can have either the option of having them do independent practice, where after the students have now mastered and you now are so sure that they can do the set tasks you're giving them, they have the chance to now work alone. And then we end it up with what we call the closure of plenaries. And so we identified all these 7 elements of direct instruction in our last episode. We also then came to the point that in our next episode, we're going to take the other set of essential steps and then work on them. And so today we're going to look at the first 2 essential steps, that is learning objectives and success criteria. And that's what we are going to focus on. I have with me Kwesi on the other side. But before I introduce Kwesi, the objective that we seek to achieve today is that we want to find out the usefulness of learning objectives and success criteria to student learning. We want to discuss the usefulness of learning objectives and success criteria to student learning. Now, how do we know whether this set objective that we are discussing, we have been able to achieve it? What will it look like if we are successful at doing this? When we are successful, each one of us present will be able to explain the uses of learning objectives and success criteria. Each one of us will be able to separate learning objectives from their context. Remember, that was one key area that we had to separate, so that we can give very good learning objectives. Then the final success criteria we have is that we'll be able to share learning objectives and success criteria in child-friendly or student-friendly language. And then fourthly, but not the least, we are going to write learning objectives and success criteria. And so when we are able to do all these 4 things, then clearly we know we know that we have been able to succeed in discussing the usefulness of learning objectives and then success criteria to student learning. So today with me, I have Kwesi on the other side. Kwesi, how are you?
I'm good, Kwadwo. It's been wonderful doing this episode with you together. We believe that the ideas, the insights that we share through this medium will really go a long way in ensuring that every child experience meaningful learning wherever they are.
Thank you very much for your commitment to doing this. And we're hoping that as we keep doing this, we'll get to transform the bottom line, that is students learning. We are members of EduTransform, and we come to you with this series. We want to encourage you to share the video with your friends and invite colleagues to also join you. And then join us every Saturday to have a discussion of our own practices so that we can work to make sure that our practices are well grounded. Uh, Kwesi, to start with, uh, can you please give us what is it that we intend to do? Basically, what is the essential question that we're trying to address in this episode?
So from the learning objective, the key understanding that we want to go with, the takeaway is the learning objective. Students having clarity about what they are being taught. Is it necessary for both the teacher and the student? If your students are clear about what you are teaching them, does it have any relevance to their learning and
In
to the
other words,
quality?
if we decide that we are going to stick to the topic we are treating without the students knowing exactly what is it that we are trying to do within that topic, is it really what we should do, or should rather focus on them understanding what is it that we want to learn in this topic rather than what the topic is? Is that what you're trying to do today?
Yeah, because if you say that we're learning about demand, that is broad,
Yes.
right? So or you are learning about numbers, or you are you are doing writing. Those are broad things, and it's important that there is a specific defined content that the teacher and the student is seeking to master or learn. And that is what we want to look at, whether being clear about what is being learned or being taught. Does it have any relevance to students' learning and their progression, as well as attainment in a particular lesson?
All right. All right. Thank you very much for that clarity to what we seek to do. What would you say is a rationale for having, I mean, an objective?
Right. So when we talk about the learning objectives or the success criteria, these are two very important things. You cannot just do one and leave the other,
Yeah,
right?
they go together.
Eh, Whenever we talk about its relevance, this is what comes to mind. That if we can just imagine you being sent by your friend or somebody, you have been sent out. Somebody asked you to sit on your bike or your car and just say drive, or just circle around, go around to a destination that you are yet to be told. But you'll only be told that you have been successful in that journey, but you're just supposed to just sit in the car or on the bike and just go to an unknown destination, and you will only be informed later whether you've been successful or you have successfully arrived. That is, even if you ever arrived.
But
See,
how would I
and
know where I'm going?
exactly. I mean,
It-
that is how, unfortunately, how learning in school look like for a number of kids. They sit in lessons after lessons after lessons,
no
but
idea where we're going.
they have no idea about how progress look like, how success look like. They have no idea about where they are going, what exactly they are learning, and how well they themselves are learning, and what works for them. They have no idea of how they can even make progress and what they need to do to move to the next step so that they can work towards achieving the desired results, which is the learning expressed in learning objectives. and knowing how success look like in terms of the success criteria. So the kids are going to school, and it's not surprising that, shockingly, in 2018, the World Bank revealed that there are millions of kids in our classrooms who are schooling, but they are not learning. And they call that as one of the greatest global socioeconomic crises of our time. And that is why we believe that this conversation really is going to engage the minds of educators and cause us to begin to reflect on how important learning clarity is to ensuring that the students in their class really enjoy learning, make progress in their learning, and actually show progress, attainment, able to attain or achieve uh, in terms of performance in whatever that they are doing in the classroom. So being clear about what students are learning is so important for their own progress and even for their engagement and participation in the learning process. And this is not just conventional knowledge alone, but research have also pointed to the fact that when students know what they are learning, which is a learning objective, and how success look like in their learning or with the learning from the visible learning research, it clearly shows that it really helps students to make progress, growth in their learning. The idea of effect size is that if a child spends a year in your class and he's grow 1 year in learning, then he's supposed to show an effect size of zero point 0.4. But if you can look at a diagram here, effect size for knowing the learning objective, not just chanting it, but knowing what the learning objective is and understanding it really helps students to learn. And that has an effect size of 0.65. Whereas if they know, in addition, how success look like in their learning, it means that they are going to make more progress in their learning because that gives you an effect size of 0.77. Okay, and so this is something that is empirically proven that if students know where they are going, uh, what they are going to learn, how they know, how they will be able to recognize success in their learning, they are more likely to learn, they are more likely to be engaged in their learning, and they are more likely to show greater progress. So for there to be learning clarity, these things are essential. They need to know what they are learning, they need to know why they are learning it, and they need to know how they are learning what they are supposed to be learning, right? The process. And then
Once again, please.
how they can recognize success with their learning. And lastly, they should be able to know how they should also be able to determine how they will know that they have learned it, which is the products that they have to be, the products of their learning. And it could be essay, it could be a solved question, mathematical question, it could be a portrait in an art class, and many products of assessment or products of learning that students demonstrate. So students
Kwesi,
need all of this to
Kwesi,
really, yes,
are you saying it is not enough
yeah.
to know what I'm learning, but why I'm learning it is as equally important?
Yes, because embedded in the learning objective doesn't say only what you are learning, but you are learning this because,
Okay.
right? So there has to be, the relevance is the key. The relevance is key. Why am I learning it? Right? So we're dealing with verbs, we're dealing with parts of speech, we're dealing with the history of Ghana, why Ghana obtaining independence, or why the name of Ghana changed from the Gold Coast to Ghana. Why was it even called Gold Coast if you are doing that? I mean, what is the relevance to today's child of knowing why Ghana was referred to as the Gold Coast? All right, so they don't just need to be able to explain based on historical evidence, why Ghana was called the Gold Coast in the past, but it also needs to know why is it important. They need to know that. It's very key in making sure that students fully understand what the learning is about and then fully understand how they are going to learn it and know clearly how success will look like in
We
their
are going to
learning.
learn it is also very important here.
Exactly, yes. The
Can we especially
process.
for that?
You see, the process is very important. Okay, so because uh, a lot of teachers have some definition of learning as being instruction. So you'll see that, like we discussed in the first episode, you have teachers talking and talking because they have the idea that when they teach, then the students will learn.
Yeah.
And that means that a lot more teachers believe that students learn from them when they talk, right? But there are so many ways that students can learn a particular content, okay? Through reading, through discussions, through observation. There are so many ways that people learn, right? So you need to think about the learning objective, and you need to think about how will the student learn that, okay? So that you're always giving them multiple opportunities to really learn the intended the learning objective. What do you want them to learn? Than looking at it from only one uh, angle, that when I tell them, then they learn. But if you think about how would they learn it, then you can think about so many ways by which you can create in the classroom for learners to be able to learn what they need to learn in a particular lesson, in reference as expressed by the learning objective
I'm a
as
teacher and I
expected.
want to have clarity in the learning for my learners. I
Yeah,
cannot go with a predetermined way by which everyone should learn, but I
no,
should rather go with multiple pathways by which my learners can achieve that set objective.
exactly. So yeah, multiple pathway, it should be multi-sensory as well. Some learn by sight, some learn by doing, okay, some learn by hearing. So it has to be multi-sensory as well, but there should be multiple pathway, as you said, to enable learning for every child. Because if it is only just one way, then it becomes difficult for those at that particular pathway, the prescribed pathway that a teacher had doesn't work for them, then you disable learning for those categories of learners in your class. So these are the reasons why a lot more kids don't make progress.
Yeah.
A lot more kids don't make progress. And it was interesting yesterday listening to the education minister designate in Ghana
Yeah.
saying that the percentage of students that goes to the tertiary as it stands now in Ghana is about 18% of those that goes to the experiences secondary education. And you're talking about millions of young Ghanaians who go through secondary education and only 18% actually access tertiary education. That is a huge gap. And that means that we need to do a lot more to reimagine how students learn in our classroom by looking at some of these essentials that we are talking about, making learning clear to them, what they are learning, how they are going to learn it, the relevance of it, and how they will know that they are being successful with their learning.
All right. Thank you very much for that clarity on how we can make learning clear for our learners. But we've been talking about what am I learning? The learning of what is that? What is learning objective?
Okay. So, so when we talk about learning objective, we're talking about that statement, that brief statement that describes what students should actually learn, right? And the learning is the knowledge, what they need to know, the things they need to understand and the things that they need to be able to do at the end of a lesson or a series of lessons, right? It's just a statement about what students are supposed to learn, right? And I've defined the learning using these 3 words of know, understand, and do. That is the KUD, because a lot of the things that students learn in school are facts, which are knowledge, definitions of concepts. They also need to be able to explain things. They need to be able to synthesize. They need to apply knowledge to novel or familiar and unfamiliar situations to solve problems. And they also have to be able to create things, right, of demonstrating skills. So students are creating essays, students are solving problems in the classrooms, math problems. So skills are things that they learn, performing experiments, writing lab reports. These are all skills that students learn. Being able to undertake an inquiry, an investigation by generating their own questionnaires, uh, administer the questionnaire, gather data, represent the data and analyze them, and then draw conclusions out of them. These are all skills that students learn from the many subjects that are available for students to choose or to study in our schools. So that is what a learning objective really is about, that is the statement of what students are supposed to learn in a lesson, which is expressed in knowledge, the things they need to understand and do. So it represents the end point, okay, of where the students are going. So, and it actually clearly outline what the intended learning that they are supposed to be doing. So it's not a list of activities. It's very important we emphasize that. So the learning objective is not the activities. The learning objectives are the things students need to know, understand, and can do, what they have to be learning in a lesson.
All right. So now, where do we get them from? Where do we get objectives from?
All right. So every teacher, every subject has a curriculum. Whether you follow the Ghanaian or the Nigerian or whichever country you are, every country has a national curriculum. But there are some schools that also follow other countries' curriculum, international curriculum. So in every country, there are international schools that follow, for example, the Cambridge curriculum, the IB curriculum, and then many other international curriculums are being used in other nations. So basically, it comes from the curriculum. That is where the objectives are. And in Ghana now, we have the standard based curriculum. And for you to know the specific learning objectives, what students ought to be learning in Ghanaian language, in science, in English, in computing, and all the many other subjects that we do in our schools, we need to look through the curriculum. And that is where we can find the learning objectives.
So if we want to be clearer now, we are saying that it is not a matter of saying, I am going to teach this topic. But then whatever you intend to teach the student, there should be a clear target, learning intention, which should be defined to show what the students should be able to do, what they should be able to demonstrate in terms of understanding, and what they should be able to know, the knowledge they're supposed to get. And you can find these set of learning intentions in your curricula that you use. And if you're using a national curriculum, it will be in there. And so you don't just pick what is stated in the textbook and say that's what we are learning. And then that's important that you visit your curriculum and then see what in learning intentions does the curriculum planners desire for learners of that curriculum to achieve, whether it's the skills, whether it's the knowledge, whether it's the understanding that they're supposed to get. Now, are there any phases for these learning objectives?
Right. So it can be broad.
Okay.
For instance, like uh, learning to write persuasively. Right. That is broad, but you can also be specific. How to structure a persuasive essay, or even more specific, looking at just the introduction aspect of writing persuasive essays in order to hook up the reader, right? So, or writing the conclusions of it. So you can look at the learning objectives in a broad sense, and then you can narrow it into the specific and the very more specific of looking at components of that broad objectives. So these are the levels or the phases of learning objectives. And it's important that when teachers are teaching, just saying that you'll be learning to write persuasively, that is broad. There are so many components of that. Each the components should have a clear learning objective and a clear learning outcome.
So it could be that if I'm the teacher, within the week, I could be focusing on helping my learners write persuasively.
Yes.
But then within each lesson, I can have specific learning intentions that we focus on in order to arrive at that end game of being able to write persuasively.
Perfect. Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, when do we say the learning objectives that we are writing are effective?
All right. So it is effective, as we have said from the definition, when it identifies clearly what students will learn.
Okay.
And not just the what, but the relevance, the reason for learning, the why. And that this objective is shared with the students at the beginning of the lesson or any activity. And we'll talk about the sharing. It has to be shared with the student. The objective is not for the teacher, it's for the student, because it's a definition of what the students will be learning in the class, in the lesson, not what the teacher will be teaching. It's what the students will be learning. And it's important that the students know and understand this intended learning. And it has to be presented to them. So we're talking about sharing at the beginning when, but how do you share it? You have to present it to them in a student-friendly language, in a language where the students fully understand, because they have to understand it. It is their learning, right? It is their learning, so they need to know exactly what they are learning. And I'm saying that every child needs to know that, not just a chorus answer, do you understand, which we're going to talk about that for a while. But a student needs to know, every child needs to know, this is what today in literacy, this is what we are learning. There are so many things we'll be learning in literacy, but today, this is what I am learning to do or to know or to understand. And this objective has to be revisited and reviewed throughout the lesson activities and throughout the lesson if we are using the learning objectives effectively. So if it doesn't identify what students are learning, then it's not effective. And if it doesn't give relevance, it's not effective. And if the students don't know, understand, or cannot really articulate it exactly what they are learning, and that everything that happens within the lesson, if that objective is not referenced throughout, then we are not using the learning intention effectively.
It's so good that we are clearly articulating that it is not just a chorus response or a refrain that all the students make that makes the learning objective effective. But then each individual student should be able to say for themselves, what is it that we are trying to learn? What is it that I'm trying to learn in this particular learning session?
Yeah.
And that even for you, the teacher, you will need to revisit it and review it throughout. And so that you point to them and you point to whether learners are working toward that set objective or not throughout your lesson. So more or less, the learning objective drives the lesson, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Very much, pretty much. It drives it. Everything, it has to be referenced to it. Assessment is, everything has to flow from that. Activities, assessment, all the reviews flows from that learning, because the activities and the assessments are all things that happens to ensure that students are given that opportunity to learn the things that they need to learn as expressed or defined by the learning intention or the objectives.
Okay. Now, let's look at how we write them.
All right,
Are
so
there particular things we need to be considering as we are writing learning objectives?
yes, so the typical one, we all know by the end of this lesson, you will, then you add what they will be learning, which clearly will be picked. You have to have some words from the Bloom's taxonomy that shows the levels of learning, which is the knowing, more of a surface learning. And then we're talking about the understanding, where you're moving into the deep learning. And then the doing, where students have to use the knowledge and the understanding they have to demonstrate or to prove or to create specific products. And I use products as evidence of learning, I mean, interchangeably with the word assessment, right? So if they're able to create essays, then because they have learned something, they know something, they understand something, then they can develop the skill of what? Writing essays. And the essay is a product that learning has happened in all the three phases of knowing, which is surface, of understanding, which is the deep, where they have to analyze, evaluate, what you call it, apply or use what they know to resolve or to explain or to analyze something. Then it culminates in the transfer, where they are creating. They're using what they know and understand to create something. So when you say by the end of the lesson, it should come with, are they listening? Are they explaining? So you will learn to explain, then you bring the content that has to be dealt with. So maybe you've learned to explain the factors that influences demand of goods and services, right? So that is where you bring the content in. Or you can use, we are learning to, again, maybe explain the factors that influences the demand of goods and services. So these initial expressions should be continuing with the Bloom's taxonomy, which defines what the students will be learning. Is it understanding? Then explain. Is it knowledge? List, identify, describe. You get that? And then you continue it with the content that they are going to deal with. Like the example I gave, that could be the determinants of demand. That's what they are looking at. Explaining the factors that could influence the demand of a good or a service. Or you can say that today you'll be able to, by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to, or you will. So these are ways by which we write the learning intention or the learning objectives. So these expressions plus the Bloom's taxonomy, which defines what they'll be learning, knowing, understanding, and doing, plus the content that they are going to deal with, which could be verbs, adjectives, it could be number sense, it could be additions, subtractions, it could be what you call it, differentiation, integration. It could be
Yeah.
so many things. It could be the alphabets, right? Phonics, recognizing the sounds of the alphabets and all of that. So either they are identifying them, whether they are explaining them, whether they are creating, drawing, plus the content that goes with it. So that is how the learning objective is actually expressed.
So in a nutshell, you start with a stem, like the examples on the far left. By the
Yeah,
end of the lesson, or
yeah,
you are learning to, by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to, today you'll be able to, and then you add a combination of the Bloom's taxonomy and
yeah,
then the content that you seek to work on. And
yes,
then when you have that, then you have written your learning objectives. And so for a math teacher, I could be looking at, by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to explain the steps you need to follow to make one item the subject in an equation or
exactly.
something like that. Because
Yes.
I know math sometimes are always fixated about the calculations,
The
such that
calculations,
the
yeah.
students don't learn to explain. And so they don't really understand what they have done. If you give it to them, if you put it like a mechanical thing for them to solve, they can easily do it, but they cannot articulate how it is done. And so even for a math lesson, you need to look at the Bloom taxonomy and say which aspect of it that is it that I'm focusing on. And like we said earlier on, your curriculum defines for you what is it that you are required to do, and so that you do not leave out those portions in there. Thank you very much, Kwesi, for that. Now, is there a difference between a learning objective and learning tasks? Are they different? The tasks that the students are doing and the learning
Yes,
objectives, are they
yes.
different?
Yeah, so that is why in defining the learning objectives earlier, I was saying that they are not a list of activities, they are the intended learning. And the
Yes.
learning here, keep in mind, clearly defined as the things students need to know, understand, and they are able to do, which are the skills that they have to be able to demonstrate. The learning tasks or learning activities, as we call it, are just activities. The things students have to do in order to what? Learn.
Okay.
Okay, what the students have to do in order to learn. So let's look at a typical example here. To estimate the length of a tree,
An activity.
okay, it's an activity and it has also an objective in there. The objective is learning how to estimate,
Good.
but the context of learning is a tree.
Yes.
So, but it doesn't mean that it's a tree alone that you can estimate. There are so many things around the child that they need to learn how to estimate. And those things that they need to learn how to estimate are the context of what learning, and they can be the learning activity. But the learning is the ability to what? Estimate things, knowing how to estimate things, right? So that is why it's important that when you are writing the learning objective, you will have to take the context or the task from it and state the learning activity as it is. We are learning how to estimate. Yes, you can estimate the length of a tree, but that is what you do in the learning process in terms of the tasks that the teacher will assign students to do so that they will learn how to estimate.
Okay. Thank you very much for that too. I know we would spend some time in writing some learning objectives.
Yeah,
All right, but we want to look at success criteria the next step, isn't it?
exactly.
Okay. So we've been able to look at the rationale for objectives, what the concept is,
Yeah,
what learning objectives are, where do we get them from, the phases of learning objectives, and then when do we say that this learning objective is an effective one, how do we write them, and then we have also finally looked at the differences between the learning objectives and learning tasks, because sometimes we add the learning tasks to the learning objectives and then we think that that is the objective. So we need to look at and decoupling the two so that it is clearly to the students what is it that we're focusing on. So now we want to look at success criteria. What is success criteria, Kwesi?
All right, so that is how success look. How success look like in a lesson? I mean, is the way that a student is able to judge whether they are successful with the learning. So it is a scoring guide for both the teacher and the student to provide feedback on the students' learning and their progress that they are making. It is a way that a teacher used to assess students' work, or for students themselves to be able to self-assess their work. So the success criteria is so key because it's a map or the roadmap to the learning intentions or the learning destination. So you need the success criteria to be able to know that you are doing well or you are on track with your learning, if I should put it that way. Okay, so it's so key to and relevant to students' ability to achieve the learning intention. Okay, so they know that this is what we are learning. But how will I know that I'm really learning that, what I need to be learning successfully? How can I recognize that I'm being successful? So the success criteria gives that opportunity for students to be able to measure their learning and to know the progress that they are making. So it's a very useful statement or tool that enables them to clearly articulate the progress they are making and also opportunity to review their own learning
If it
and the
were to
progress
be
that they're
an
making.
exercise or exams, it will be the marking scheme that I will follow to tell myself I'm correct here or I'm wrong there.
Yeah, that normally the teachers use. So now
Yes.
you have
And
to
I have to
share
bring
it.
it.
You have to share it with the students.
Okay.
So that is the idea, that whilst you share the learning objective, you share that math scheme, if it's a scoring guide, to the students, so that the students, whilst they are learning or performing the tasks in the guided practice and the independent practice session, will use that as a basis to determine whether they are making the desired or the required progress in their learning or otherwise.
Okay. And it also means that that criteria is so critical that if the learners have it, they themselves can do peer assessment or self-assessment of whatever they are doing. And
Yeah.
so in an art class, for instance, we're saying that this particular art piece is it qualifies, it meets the criteria. Then we should all know the criteria that the art piece should have. Probably looking at proportions.
Yeah.
You can't draw a human being whose head is bigger than his tummy. It is not proportionate. And so if proportion needs to be a factor, then the child needs to know what proportions is going to be acceptable in doing this drawing and all those things. All right, now, Kwesi, let's look at what makes success criteria effective then.
All right, so like we've been sharing, it links to the learning objective, right? Without it, the student will not know whether they have arrived. Right? So if the success criteria leads the students to the learning objective, then it's effectively it was effectively written and that is being effectively used to guide students in their learning. And it has to be specific to a task that the students have been given. It needs to be, again, like the learning objective, discussed and agreed with the student before they even undertake a task, right? So it's not like you give them a task, like the thinking, unfortunately, in our education sector, where the more students fail, unfortunately, the assumption is that the better the teacher who teaches them. But this is completely out of the question because the more students succeed, the better the teacher who instructs them. Is that not? I think that's how we have to look at it. All
Yeah.
right. So the success criteria is to ensure that most of your kids are successful what they are learning, and it's not something you don't keep it and give them a difficult work. I'm tricking you, like we say in our part of the world. And the students struggle and struggle and they fail. Meanwhile, the idea about what exactly you have to follow and do to be able to be successful is in the mind of the teacher. And that is why we say discuss, if it is discussed and agree with the students before they embark on a task or any activity, then they are confident about it. They are guided by that criteria, and they can review their work as they progresses. And if they are not on track, they will know. And if there are something missing, they will be able to come to terms with and make the needed adjustment. So like you said, it should be the basis for feedback. And it's interesting to note that research points to about 80% of feedback within a class is actually between the student, peer-to-peer feedback, not between
Teacher to student.
the teacher to student. So it tells you that if your students don't have the correct guide, all right, that is leading them to being successful with their learning, then you can imagine the kind of feedback they are giving each other, right? And that will really in itself be counterproductive to the student's own learning. It is not going to enable it, it's going to disable it. And that is why it's important that teachers master the skill of drafting success criteria in addition to the learning intention to guide students in their learning, to guide students in execution of tasks and assignments or exercises or activities that have been given to them so that they can be confident and be encouraged and enjoy learning and be motivated to do that. So that success criteria, if it is effective, will also scaffold the learning for students, and it will engage the students and enable them to focus on the task and be good and be successful with it.
Okay. The effective success criteria should link to the objective. It should be specific to an activity. It should be discussed and agreed upon prior to the activity being done. It should be
Yes.
scaffolded and focused on the students as they engage in the task. And then it should be the basis for feedback. And like you said, 80% of the feedback is between students. And so the students can only give feedback to each other if there is a well-defined success criteria, which will form the basis of peer assessment and self-assessment.
Assessment.
Well articulated, Kwesi. Why is it then important to have success criteria? Obviously, it's very important, but
Very
why?
important, yeah, because it shows the students what they need to aim at and how they can get there, right? And like we said, for even assessing their own work and even assessing other people's work and giving correct feedback to them. And this builds independence. This enables the students, for instance, to not solely be reliant on the teacher's judgment, but they can confidently build their own, they can be confident in their own judgment of their own work because of the well-written success criteria that really guides them for them to know what exactly is required to produce a successful work. Okay, so that is the kind of confidence that this will bring to students and the encouragement that it brings to them, and it makes them want to learn, right? So that is so critical for students learning that teachers have to learn the skill of writing effective success criteria as a guide for their learners to make the required progress that they need to make. And because it serves as a guide, students can refer to it whilst they are doing the work. They can be making corrections with their tasks. They can evaluate their own work and then make the needed adjustment. And they can tell you exactly what they need to do to make their work, bring their work to the grade level expectations. And I think it makes learning fun, easy, and interesting, and enjoying by students than enduring it, enduring it in the classroom.
I can imagine a class where success criteria and clearly defined objectives are the key pillars of the lesson, and how exciting and engaging and student-centered that lesson will be. We are talking about direct instruction, and initially the thought on direct instruction was the fact that because it is teacher driven, it's going to, the students are going to be passive. But I don't see a situation where if a teacher plans the lesson with all these key elements in there, the students are going to be passive, because they
Yeah.
are definitely going to do a lot of the work for themselves.
Uh-huh.
And then the teacher then becomes the facilitator of whatever is being done. If the students know what they are aiming at, they can work independently based on the fact that there's a criteria. They are clear about what to judge and how to judge it. And then they have something they can refer to. I'm sure those learners are definitely going to be learners who can reflect on their own learning and be guided by that. And I
Yeah.
believe this is really a very good thing, ingredient that all educators need to make sure it is part of their menu for any teaching, even if they are using direct instruction. Now,
Yes.
how do I write a good success criteria?
All right. So again, I'll just give the prompts, but we'll look at more examples in detail. So for
Okay.
example, you can say that what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So you give the intention, what do you call it? You give the learning intention, and then you say that what I'm looking for.
So
So
you
if you
have
want us,
you've given the objective,
yes.
and
So
at
if, for
at the
example,
end of the objective, you add what you are looking for that
yeah,
objective to be met.
exactly.
Okay.
Another could be that what I expect from everyone.
Mm-hmm. The kind of product I want.
Yes. And this will attract the attention of a number of students who are
Yeah, this part.
grade
Yeah.
conscious. Like,
Yes.
so for a top grade, you
Mm-hmm.
have to do this to be able
Mm-hmm.
to earn a top grade.
Mm-hmm.
To be successful, like the example we just gave, to be successful in being part of this particular training, you should be able to appreciate now the usefulness of success criteria and learning objectives. You should be able to distinguish the learning objectives from the context of learning, right? So those are the things that we have looked at. So, and then the last one, which I also like very much, I can statement. So if you say that I can maybe identify or give examples of this and that, I can explain, I can analyze this. So, and I can statement about what students can do as a result of their learning in that particular lesson. So right now in this lesson, we can have I can statement, the things that you can do as a result of being part of this particular training section as we look at a discussion on effective teaching and learning institute, looking broadly at the concept of clarifying learning by stating its intentions and success criteria. What can you do after watching this particular video? Or you can write an effective learning intention for your lessons. You can write an effective success criteria for your lessons. And you can use the learning intention and success criteria to guide your students' learning in a particular lesson effectively. So these are things that ways of expressing what you call it, the success criteria. And we'll look, as I said, specific examples with the learning intention and the success criteria, how you can actually write them using examples from the known curriculums that we have.
Yeah. I know some teachers already do that. I remember back in the days, my math teacher will tell you when you are doing geometric construction
Yeah.
that to be able to have top mark for this construction, you should make sure that there are no wavy lines or double lines,
Uh-huh.
that your arcs cross each other,
Yes.
that the perpendicular line that you draw to the line should pass through the intersecting arcs. He will give you all those sets
Yeah.
of things you need to have. And I remember some other man just telling you that to get full marks for this work, you need to show working. I think that was an attempt to give a success criteria. But then
Exactly.
we need to be more specific so that what do you mean by I should show working?
Show working. Yes.
What should I show so that I know that I'm on the right track? Because I can't
Exactly.
just do anything, put anything down, and then I just go on. So I think, yes, a lot of us have some of these. We will need to now imbibe some of these new ideas and then add on to what we were doing so that in the end, our learners are the ones that benefit most from this. Now, do we
Exactly.
need to be particular about how we share the learning intentions or the
Very
success
much.
criteria?
We should, yeah. Like we said, it has to be in a student-friendly manner. I mean, the first episode, that is the things that we looked at.
Okay.
But there are two things that I also want to talk about in reference to sharing. So now that you know how to write the learning objectives from the curriculum, and out of it design the success criteria, which help students to recognize whether they've been successful with their learning. When you have shared it, when you just say, these are the learning intentions, these are the success criteria, you don't just ask students, do you understand or does everybody understand? It's important that you use students' reflection.
Okay.
You can call on the students to explain to the class again what they think they are going to learn as defined by the learning objective, and how they will know that they are being successful with their learning, right? So once they share, then you can clearly be able to identify where there's some confusion, there's some misunderstanding, or where there are no clarity for learners about it. And it's important that you do all of this to ensure that students have clarity about these things before you actually go on the fourth stage of presentation where you are teaching.
Please take this part again. What are you clearly saying about, instead of saying do you understand, which normally elicits yes sir or no sir, those
Yeah.
chorus response.
Yeah.
And you ask which part don't you understand, they say the whole show.
Yes.
What is it that you are recommending we
So
should do?
you call the student Ama Kofi, yeah, to explain to the class
Okay.
what they think we will be learning
B.
as expressed in the learning objective, and how they will know they are successful with the learning as
Okay.
expressed in the success criteria. And
Okay.
once you see that there are some misunderstanding or some confusion or lack of clarity about it, then you explain, but you have to ensure that Kofi, Amaya, Kwesi, Kwadwo, whoever is in the class, that you are responsible in teaching, understand exactly what today's learning is about for each of them and how they will know that they will be successful. And once there's that clarity, then you can move on with instruction, which is the stage 4 of the direct instruction.
Okay. That
Another way is also using questioning. right? So not only at the beginning, but also throughout the lesson, while students are working on tasks, whilst you are even teaching, you have to pause to check for understanding of what you are teaching and understanding of the learning intention. So you might have taught something, or the students have been asked to do some work. You can use these types of questions by saying, can you remind me of what we are trying to do? Or why are we doing this? What do you have to do to get top marks? That is the success criteria. So you have to be asking these questions continuously throughout the learning process as a prompt to see whether the students understand what the learning is about and how they will know they are going to be successful. And then you can be sure that learning is happening within your space.
Again, it is not do you understand or what is
No,
the problem, what don't you understand? Can you
no,
remind me what you are trying to do?
yeah,
Why are we doing this? The relevance. And then what do you have to do to get top marks?
yes,
So that now the students even now have the success criteria as a reference point that they are going to go through to see whether they are really on track, self-assess whatever they are doing. All right. Any other thing that we need to?
and it's important that teachers actually stop using that expression. Does everybody understand, or do you understand?
I think
Because
by now a lot of teachers know it's not helpful to them because sometimes the students really make you angry.
yeah,
They will say yes, sir, and you give them work and they will get them all wrong, or they will say no, sir, and then you ask them what part don't you understand, they will tell you the whole show. Can you imagine you've taught for about 1 or 2 hours and then the students say the whole show? What,
exactly.
what were they doing in the class? And so I think teachers are now getting to realize that it is certainly not a good way to go.
Yeah, so the referencing the learning objective and the success criteria through questioning is a way to do go instead of asking, do you understand? But can you remind me of what we are trying to do? Or can you remind me of what you are learning today? Why are we doing this? Do you have, what do you have to do? Or what are you doing to get the top grade or to be successful with your learning? So when you're using those questioning and prompts, then it really drawing the attention on the learning and how success will look like with the learning. And that is what will bring the motivation for students to make the required progress in their learning.
Okay. Can we now look at how we write good success criteria?
All right, so let's look at the writing together.
Okay.
Let's look at an example here in language where we are teaching students how to identify the central idea of a given text. So that is a learning objective. We are learning to identify the central idea of a text. But how will they know that they are being successful? If they can define the central idea, if they know what a central idea is, then they can list some of the key details of a text. If they can analyze some of the key details to determine the central idea of a text, then they can analyze how the central idea is reflected in the text and cite evidence to support their thinking around the central idea. So these are things that the students are going to use to see whether they have mastered the idea of identifying the central idea of a text. So here you can see it's beyond just knowledge, but it's also requiring the learning of what? Understanding. Let's look at an example in science. Let's say students are learning to write lab reports. So by in this lesson, our focus is on how they can write the conclusion for a lab report. So the success criteria can look like this. What I'm looking for is for you to set your conclusion out in 3 paragraphs. The first will describe the pattern you find in your results. The second paragraph will explain this using, so first you are describing the pattern you find. In your second paragraph, we want an explanation of that pattern, but you have to use the scientific ideas that the lesson was based on, that you've been talked about. And then the third will be to state whether the hypothesis you investigated was supported or not supported from the evidence. So when you give this kind of a guide, it will be clear what should be in that conclusion of the report, right? And it will help the students in writing the conclusion for the report of the lab. So I picked this also from the history curriculum from the primary school, the standard-based curriculum in Ghana, the history curriculum. And if you open it, it has a standard, content standard. And the content standard says that to demonstrate understanding of why Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. So there are several objectives that can be drawn from this standard. But one of it is what I have here. For example, one other objective that you can pick from it is why the name changed. Why did the name change from Gold Coast to what? Ghana. But first, we want to investigate why even the name Gold Coast. So by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to explain why in the past, Ghana was known as what? The Gold Coast. So what kind of success criteria? I have a very long success criteria, so I couldn't fit all of them on the slide. But one of the things, the way you can write the success criteria is that what I expect from everyone is a description of the events leading to the advent of the Europeans and advanced reasons for what led to the naming of Ghana as the Gold Coast. So if the students are aware about the coming of the Europeans, what the Portuguese came first, they came to trade, and it's out of the trade what they discovered, at the coast of Ghana is what that led to the naming of of Ghana as the Gold Coast. So they could look at the event, a description of it, and then identify the idea of trading as one of the strong reasons resulting in the naming of Ghana as the Gold Coast, in line with who did it and all of those details. But this is how I want the students to do the write-up. It should have 3 main parts: an introductory paragraph that sets the scene, a description of the events in the chronological order, and then a concluding statement. But you can go further to say that a good one should contain, for example, I talk about trading as one of the key reasons that led to the idea of calling Ghana or naming it as the Gold Coast, because that's what they found. History says that what they found in Ivory Coast, ivory, so they call it Ivory Coast. So you can clearly tell the student what you want. A good answer will contain this or this or that or that, so that this serves as a clear guide. Somebody might think that if you do this, Mr. Kwadwo, then you are giving the student all the apple.
You're giving them everything.
Everything. But they will never get. But that is what we want. We want them to be able to learn. We want them to be able to make the progress. Right? So you write the success criteria in such a manner that it serves as a guide. Okay, to the student.
Being a math person, I will rather make it quite simpler. Yeah. I will tell the learners, to be successful, you need to outline the events.
Okay.
And then next step, give the reasons that led to those events.
Yes.
And then the setup or the write-up you do to have an introduction, 3 main parts: an introduction where the scene is set, and then a chronological order for how things proceeded, and then a conclusion of why it ended so.
Yes.
So that I try to make it simpler. I may choose to use a graphic organizer, which set out where you should have these key points, so that the child or the student will have those things there. Those that are graphical oriented students can easily see that, oh, okay, what are the key events? Like I'm writing an essay, I jot down 3 main events that happened, and then for each of the events, I give the reasons. And then the last part of my sheet, I look at the introduction to that, and then the main ideas in there, and the conclusion to it. I think that could also be another way of capturing a success criteria for this particular lesson.
Yes, yes, yes. So these are just those few examples about how to write the success criteria, the learning objectives, and the success criteria for your lesson.
Right. I think it has been so helpful today with the number of things we have looked at. I think in summary, I'll do part of the summary, and then Kwesi will do the other parts. We started off by looking at where we started off the previous episode, where we look at the key elements of direct instruction. Remember, what we are discussing is under direct instruction. And then we realized that there are 7 key elements to that. Then we went on to look at the rationale for objective. And I was quite struck by the picture that had the bicycle person riding a bicycle, climbing a mountain. And then he's told, your instructions will be given to you when you get there. And I'm just wondering, what if I run downhill? Will I get to the destination that the teacher wants me to get? What if I go uphill? What if I even lose my way all the way up? Wesley, do you have that one? Yes. And for me, it gave me exactly what happens in our classrooms, where we tend to think that I know where I'm taking my students to. They need not know the key aim or target that we are all working at. When we get there, we will tell them that now you have finally arrived at what we set out. And so that was the first part that Kwesi helped us to clarify. We also looked at then defining what learning objectives are. We then went on to look at where we get the learning objectives from. And thankfully, we know that each curriculum you use have outlined your set learning objectives. And so it's not your textbook that you go and pick and then say, okay, today I'm teaching change of subjects, or I am doing board maths, or I am doing, let me give a science one, we are doing plants, flowering plants, and all those things. But then what is it within flowering plants that we are focusing on should be clear. We also realize that there are phases to learning objectives. And then we realize that the learning objectives need to be effective. And if it's effective, they need to let the learner know what is it that they are learning, how the process, and then the relevance, and then also the criteria that will be used in evaluating it. And then Kwesi came in with the last bit where we look at success criteria. I think it's been so helpful today with this session on learning intentions and success criteria. And as we said in our previous episode, these two are 2 of the major pillars that each learner needs so that they can have a good grasp of what is it that we are working at. And when they have that, they can really move on effectively to the learning targets that we have for them. We want to invite you to join us again come next week, whilst we look at the other key essential elements of direct instruction and your presentation, how to look at your guided practice, the independent practice, and most importantly, the closure of plenary. We will take a look at all of them. We want to encourage you to share this with your colleagues, invite them to our page, for us to continue to have discussions on the practices that we have been following, so that in the end, our learners will be the beneficiaries of the good practices that we have, and then we can continue to establish very, very good practices that gives us the bottom line effect, that is learner learning and learner improvement. Thank you very much for your time here today with us. We hope to see you again next week, same time. Bye-bye and have a great evening.